with you, ladies and gentlemen, for another edition of the greatest show that you've ever seen in your life, right? I think so. I've heard that before. That show is what? That's the BoomBastiCAST, and boy, do we have a great episode with y'all today. A lot of fun. We have author, screenwriter, documentarian, liver of life for crying out loud, the great Steve Stoliar in the building of raised eyebrows. My years inside Groucho's house. Hell yeah. Check the book. Great book. Great dude. We're about to pop into in a little bit. This dude first came across my radar being on the Gilbert Gottfried podcast. Rest in peace, Gilbert. Gilbert, one of the only stand-up comedians that me and my cohort over here, Alexander the Hauck, have seen together. Woo! 2019 Gathering of the Juggalos up in here. Mind you, ICP, the first, not quite, Groucho was the first folk that I can remember to throw on that grease paint right under the stachio, you know what I mean? Yeah, dude, it was a lot of fun. So I don't know why I veered off into the Gathering of the Juggalos, but yeah, we were there with Gilbert. That's what it was. First heard about Steve on the Amazing Colossal podcast, a podcast that, of course, slowed down a little bit since Gilbert passed. I believe they still do like best of episodes. I think they're continuing to put out like they're like rehashing a little bit. With Frank Santapadre there, I believe. I'm probably murdering his name, but Frank on that episode, on that show, very cool with Gilbert, and his wife was a big part of it, and it was sad to see that go for multiple reasons, because that was one of the, of course, Gilbert, but that was one of the places that you would be able to hear a lot about old-timey flicks and television and stuff like that, because Gilbert was a diehard fan. And it was really kind of a breath of fresh air, because you were hearing about films and you were hearing stories that you typically wouldn't hear on any other type of show. You know what I mean? So that was very sad to go. But, ladies and gentlemen, like I said, we got a good one for you this evening. Raised eyebrows. I just love the cover of this. Steve Stoliar doing it big. We think everybody will enjoy this episode. We got a whole bunch of cool stories. Yeah, he blessed us with almost 2 hours worth of goodness. You know what I mean? And I'm excited to get into the episode. So do you have anything to say before we pop on in?
Nothing much other than it's great finding out and hearing these stories of the idols of yesteryear, the those that are gone but not forgotten. I mean,
Yeah.
that's and one of the things that I think is so important is to look back and keep in mind everything that has gone before. It's like the old saying, those who don't watch or learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And and the thing is that, and as we'll end up talking a little bit on the show, that um, when you have stuff that are done from a different time, there's different sensibilities.
Yeah.
And when you go to a different time, those sensibilities change, and people say, that's not right, that's too crass, that's insulting, that's not nice. You shouldn't, say this or do this. So they then, say we have to get rid of all these classic things, classic films, books, music, all that, because it no longer fits in our narrow view of what is acceptable.
A current narrative, yes.
Yeah, and the fact is that's one of the biggest problems that's facing us right now is the fact that, and I've said this many times, that there's a lot of things that I've seen I don't agree with, I don't like. Guess what? I don't watch them. I don't buy them. I don't, give
Take
the
it to
people my
heart.
money to make them. That
Yeah.
is how a normal person deals with these kind of situations.
Mm.
Okay, going out and trying to cancel it, remove it, burn it, it's evil, it's bad, that is wrong.
Yeah.
Okay? Because if you do that for that, later on, something that you believe is something that we need will be burned and thrown away. Okay? Because those kind of opinions change with whoever's in power, whoever has the influence. Okay? And when you start accepting things like that now, it's going to get worse later on. It's like going back to the book burnings during World War II. Okay? Saying that, oh, now we can't watch something because it has a stereotype that is considered offensive.
Yeah.
Well, it might be, and you have a point. Don't watch it.
Right.
Don't pay your money to promote it. That is how you deal with that. You don't stand up and say, okay, everyone, we have to get rid of all these things that were made during a different time when that was acceptable. It's not acceptable now. Fine. Don't watch it. It's always that simple.
That's true. You got to be careful. You don't want them burning up your BoomBastiCAST episodes. You know what I mean? Coming at you, BBC boys up in her. But yeah, I'm with you 110%. You know, like I said in the interview, it's people unfortunately can't put a line between entertainment and comedy. Entertainment's always going to be a little more boombastic, if you will, a little more, pushing the envelope. Not so, it ain't real life. People used to know that back in the day. That ain't real life. It's entertainment. And people have lost track. But I don't know if they've lost track or if they just go, hey, I'm an important person, and people are important. Don't get me wrong. It's such a weird discussion to have. Everybody's important. Everybody's opinion matters. But it's kind of like when your opinion, everybody's free to have an opinion, but when you tell people they have to change or you have to change this because it goes against my single opinion, there's a problem with that. You know what I mean? Especially when you're losing good entertainment out there. It's like, yeah, something might be a little rough for you, but there's people out there that need to see that. They need to hear that. Like I tell people, like the joke we make about dark comedy. It's like, not the joke, but what we say about dark comedy. It's like, yeah, some people maybe didn't have like as comfy lives as you. Maybe they seen some shit, so like they're not, somebody sitting on a whoopee cushion ain't gonna get to them. They might need something a little bit heavier in the comedy aspect or darker in the comedy aspect to be able to break through to get to that laugh. You know what I mean? Everybody needs to be able to laugh and have something to kind of take them away from whatever may be going on in their life. You know what I mean? And once you have somebody that might not, you know, puppy dogs and popsicles, you know what I mean? Like everything's great for them so they can laugh at something foolish, you know what I mean? Once that goes down, once you go, okay, well, everybody, okay, this is the bar. This is where the bar is set for the darkness or where the humor's at. You're gonna, ixnay, exile certain folks, which isn't good. You know what I mean? Like you said earlier in it, the comedy is, what'd you say? What'd you say about comedy? It's
I,
something.
I consider comedy the great equalizer. And
There you
what
go.
I mean by that is the fact that no one is above being poked fun at. Okay? Okay? You can be
Right.
a king, you can be a president, you can be a lowly janitor, you can be whatever. Okay? And the fact is, if you start saying, well, you can't say this because it might ruffle someone's feathers, hurt someone's, and all of that, it's like when I grew up, one of the things my mom would always teach me is sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That is the truth. Okay? Right? I can call you whatever I want. That doesn't hurt. I mean, oh, okay, your feelings might be hurt. Might not feel great,
Yeah.
but you know what? You're physically not harmed. All right?
Right.
You can deal and process. I mean, that's a part of growing up. Okay, the world is not a utopia. Okay, and It would be nice if we could make the world a utopia, but that is never going to happen. And the fact is that if someone says or does something that upsets you, then turn off the TV, ignore them, walk away. That's what you do. Okay, you're not going to change people's opinions. You're not going to make them not say the things they'll say. Now, with comedy, my personal opinion is that nothing should be off limits with comedy if it's put into if it's actual comedy. If someone's making a joke, okay, and that's the purpose of it. And some like Matt said when we were talking about and also Steve about how Groucho would say something and then get a response back from T.S. Eliot, and people saying, "Oh, they were rivals, they didn't like each other." No, they were kidding, they were joking back and forth. Okay, that kind of, I mean, I have the same kind of relationship with my pal Mathew. Okay, we joke around, we kid each other, we give barbs. That's how it is. Okay, we don't take any of this seriously, and that is what I think that people have to start doing with comedy, because otherwise, all we're going to get is a whoopee cushion, fart jokes, and that's the comedy that's coming out now. Okay, I mean, I can't think of any films, comic films, that have come out in the last 20 years that were funny, because none of them were. They were
DJ
all,
Stan the Man, dude. DJ Stan
well,
the Man.
other than DJ Stan the Man, because, well, we actually try to push the envelope. We try to do like something actually funny.
Yeah.
Okay, instead of like, okay, let's have a scene of an attractive girl sitting on the toilet pooping.
Oh
I
my.
mean, that is like, one of the that's what you see so much now is the scatological humor, which is great if you're a 2-year-old, but when you're an adult, you want to see something more.
Yeah, being too sensitive is not a good look. It's actually a burden. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's almost like when you don't want to say no to your kid, and you go, "Oh, well, I'm being a nice person. I'm not going to say no to them," and then they turn into a monster. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
Say no
kind of
to
the same
your kid.
thing. Where you're people being patted on the head for being too sensitive, and we're creating a monster with those people. And then they think that because they have a different outlook on comedy or whatever, or so they're offended by something that it needs to be erased from the earth. That's a monster that's been created. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But me and Alex are going for presidency. That's why we're doing these things. We need to be elected. But yeah, dude, I'm with you 110%. We tap into that a little bit in this episode, as well as a lot of really cool stuff. You know what I mean? We get in everything from Groucho Marx to Rob Zombie is discussed in this, and can't ask for anything else. What a great episode we got up. It was a lot of fun to do, and we hope it's a lot of fun for you guys to watch out there. So without any further ado, for the first time to the BoomBastiCAST, we welcome the great Steve Stoliar. Steve, welcome to the BoomBastiCAST. Steve, welcome to the BoomBastiCAST.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I hope.
Yeah, I think it will be good. I think it'll be a pleasure all around. You know what I mean?
Okay. We'll see.
Hell yeah. So the author of the great Raised Eyebrows book, you know what I mean?
You.
Big fans of it. Me and Alex both read it. It was good times. The first time it popped on my radar. There you go. I'll show mine too, so I'm not left out of the
Both editions, the original hardcover from the 90s and then the updated and expanded, revised from 2012, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
But essentially the same book. Yes, sir. My Years Inside Groucho's House is the subtitle, which also explains a little more about what I am.
And reading it was a great read. I do recommend it to anybody, just whether you're a Groucho fan or not. You know what I mean? It's a really cool inside scoop. You really do feel like you're within the house with you. You know what I mean? You go through the
Oh, that
time
was my
frame.
plan. And it
Yeah.
really, for anyone that ever was essentially obsessively a fan of someone and thought if I could just shake their hand and instead get pulled into their daily life, whether it's a rock star or a politician or author or whatever, sports figure, you can put yourself in my place about what it means to have met your hero. Because a lot of people will meet someone early in their lives just because circumstances, like they saw a want ad or Craigslist, someone needs an assistant or something like that, and only later come to realize who they were and think, oh, I wish I could have appreciated them at the time. But in my case, I was truly an obsessive fan, although I didn't stalk Groucho to try to attack him or marry him
Yeah.
or anything like that. But it was enormously frustrating that I would hear about Groucho's sightings. Oh, I saw him taking a walk in a park in Beverly Hills. Oh, I saw him walking past some shops on Beverly. Oh, I saw, and it's like, how can I be where he'll be? How do you plan that? How do you? And it was just terribly frustrating because he was already in his 80s and his health was declining, and I thought it's just not going to happen, and I need to accept that. And instead, I not only met him, but was hired to work inside his house as his personal secretary and archivist, um, arranging and categorizing all of his memorabilia, which was just sort of bursting out of closets, scrapbooks, letters, photos, scripts, which would be donated to the Smithsonian after he was gone. And just working in his house next to my hero, being able to comfortably ask him all sorts of questions and hear his stories and meet his famous friends, plus also because I was such a Marx Brothers fan, I knew all of these writers and directors that would come visit him, either from seeing their names roll by in old movies or from the book, The Groucho Letters, because some of them were people that he often corresponded with. So it was just an astonishing 3-year run. The last 3 years of his life, I was in college. And the downside, of course, was getting close to my hero as he was fading out. So it packed more of an emotional punch to be there on a daily basis and see how he was doing. And then dealing with this very mercurial, ambitious young actress named Erin Fleming, who had begun as Groucho's secretary and had become his manager. And then as he grew older and more frail, he grew more dependent on her to make all decisions for him personally and professionally. And that became a classic story. You hear a lot about famous, powerful, wealthy men who, towards the end, come into the clutches of an ambitious younger woman and alienate the old friends and the family members. And I was caught in this tug of war at the age of 20, essentially, but I wouldn't have traded any of it. That's the short answer to a question that I don't think you even asked.
No, but I mean, I dig it, With Erin, like, what do you think it was that kept Erin around? Was it the fact that Groucho just wanted like a younger girl, like, on his arm? I mean, he really could
Well,
have probably had anybody, right? So to speak.
well, yeah, it's as I mentioned in the book, the color of truth is gray, and as I've gotten older and grayer, I've come to realize that few people are all heroic or all villainous. And even when if you're writing a novel or a screenplay, the best heroes have flaws and the best villains have admirable traits, like Dr. Moriarty or Darth Vader or something. Erin came around at a time when Groucho's last wife had left him, and he was never quite retired, but he wasn't really hot, although the baby boomers had begun to embrace the anarchy and anti-establishment effrontery of the Marx Brothers. That was already going before she came aboard. But there wasn't much happening in his life. And she kind of picked him up and dusted him off and got him going on those one-man shows. And he loved having the spotlight back on him. He loved having an attractive woman on his arm, the same way George Burns liked to show up puffing a cigar with some attractive young lady at a premiere or something like that. I've never met anyone in a position to have an informed opinion who believed there was anything romantic or physical. I mean, first of all, this was pre-Viagra, and I just don't think that was ever the nature. But he was very fond of her and kind of infatuated and flattered that she was so devoted to him when other people, you know, his son Arthur didn't really want to be put in a position of having to look after him. And there was a rumor that he would have put Groucho in a home if it had been up to him. And Groucho was, his longtime friend and writer Arthur Sheikman was in an assisted living facility, and it always depressed Groucho to visit Arthur, but they were devoted friends, so he would go visit Arthur and bring him a bottle of scotch and a box of candy each time. And Groucho's youngest daughter, Melinda, had turned her back on Hollywood and moved to Mendocino in Northern California and had started a family. And his middle child, Miriam, had lots of emotional problems and dependency problems and wasn't in any kind of condition to be. So Erin, you know, her timing was good, and Groucho gradually relied on her. The unfortunate thing is that she was very volatile. She was later diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, so she saw enemies where there weren't any and didn't see ones that were there. And I think she just didn't accept Groucho's mortality. I think she thought if she yelled at him and shook him, she could shake the rust off of the gears and he would be a younger person again. And it's not fair, because even though he was that legendary figure, he was still an 80-something-year-old man with bad arteries who had had a stroke and heart and urinary and hearing problem. You know, he was an old man, and people back then were older than they are now. I mean, back then being 84 or something like that was really advanced, and people didn't tend to make it a lot past there. Now you see, you know, Mel Brooks at 98 and all these people, you know, Dick Van Dyke still agile, but that wasn't the case in the 70s. And I think she, you know, so she was detrimental to his health, and her rants would send his blood pressure skyrocketing, and the nurses were very concerned about it. But if they got in the way, she off with their heads. I mean, she hired and fired everyone. And as I say, Groucho liked having her around. So it was a very complicated equation. And those of us who thought it would be nice if she could be subtracted from the equation were also worried that it's like if you have an elderly heroin addict and just suddenly pull the needle away and say, go cold turkey, it could kill him. And he had grown so dependent on her, we really weren't sure that if you somehow were able to remove her from his life, if the trauma of that would be worse than letting her continue to be this sometimes positive, sometimes very negative presence in the house. So it was a lot for me to for me to cope with at 19 or 20, because I came from a family that it's like there was no divorce, there was no drinking, there was no screaming, there was no slamming of doors, there was no profanity. We were very well behaved and very middle of the road, people from St. Louis, from the Midwest. And I had no exposure to volatile personalities. And and then Erin and her friends, since this was the early 70s, there was a lot of recreational drug use.
Mm.
So you had pot and coke and pills, in addition to the medications that Erin was prescribed. And you just weren't sure. You know, those of us in the household would judge Erin's mood by how hard she slammed the front door and threw her keys in the silver dish. It's like, oh, she's Mrs. Hyde today.
Yeah.
Fasten your seatbelts. But you know, as Dorothy said at the end of Oz, some of it wasn't very pretty, but most of it was wonderful, and that's, you know, my bottom line about this life-changing experience for me.
You think that she came in originally with ever came in with good intention and just kind of got selfishly warped when the more power she realized she possessed? Or do you think she
Possibly.
came in from the get-go being like, if I start running this guy's life for him, I can kind of take advantage of
I don't think
everything.
she thought the chess game that far ahead. But she wasn't getting much work as an actress and had gotten some work like temping, I mean, for long stretches of time as secretaries for different people. And she was in the office of writer producer Jerry Davis, who was producing That Girl at the time, and he was a longtime friend of Groucho's. And she had gone to see Jerry about getting a part in an episode of That Girl. And Groucho had called Jerry while she was in the office, and Jerry said, "Well, I'm with a very attractive young actress." And Groucho said, "Well, I could use a secretary now. I don't have one." And I think she thought, "I will hitch my wagon to this star and see where it gets me, because I don't really have any other prospect." Jerry later said it was one of the great regrets of his life, having hooked them up, which speaks volumes. I got to know him, and he was a great guy, and just sort of an eternal adolescent. He always had young girlfriends. He had a real charm, even when he was in his later years. Jerry got to be hard of hearing, so after much pleading, he finally got a hearing aid. And then one of his young lady friends said, "Oh, that's the same kind my grandmother wears." And he put it in a drawer and never put it in again. So Jerry was a great guy. He had a picture of himself in Times Square in his office, standing in front of the statue of George M. Cohan. And the statue has some of the songs that Cohan wrote in bronze around it. And Jerry was standing in front of where it said, "You're a grand old flag." And he lifted his middle finger to cover the L, so it just said, "You're a grand old fag." That was Jerry. He was great. So he's the one that brought them together. And I think she just thought, let's see where this goes. But she certainly wanted to take advantage of Groucho, like, call your friend so-and-so and see if I can get in this movie, or call, you know. And there's one of the Cavett shows, it might have been the last one, because Groucho did several, where he brought Erin on and introduced her as his secretary, and she talked about, you know, acting, and Cavett tolerated her diluting the conversation with Groucho. So yeah, he did what he could to help her along, but she was ultimately her own worst enemy because of her volatile personality. And in fact, after Groucho died and there was a lawsuit between Groucho's heirs, the Bank of America, against Erin, the lawsuit claiming that she had sort of finagled money and gifts away from Groucho and took advantage of a fading older man. The jury ruled against her, and for the Bank of America, which also said something, that they went with a big multi-billion-dollar corporation in sympathy instead of this woman, this single middle-aged woman.
Yeah.
But they interviewed the foreman afterwards, and he said, we felt like she had something to hide. Ultimately, she was her own worst enemy. And that pronouncement really works for the years she was with Groucho, because she would build bridges and then set fire to them. But people also understood that she was the dragon in front of the treasure, and they had to deal with her if they wanted to get through to Groucho, because she was the keeper. And then I think there's a lot of couples where someone thinks, she's wonderful, why she married that asshole, I'll never know. Or conversely, you know, he's just a great guy, salt of the earth, married to this harridan that treats him and you just sort of have to, you can't say, can you leave your wife at home?
Yeah.
I mean, come over for dinner. And that's sort of what we had with Erin and Groucho.
Yeah, like didn't she own half of like the Groucho Corporation? Like,
yeah, but it meant nothing at the time. Yeah, she would, these business deals, she would swing the, you know, she would go into her office at the house, which used to be Groucho's last wife's bedroom, and with lawyers and business people and all these contracts for percentages of stuff. But she was, you know, she also had that thing that a lot of employees have, which is, I don't think you realize who you're dealing with in terms of them and not the person they represent. So it's like she would throw his weight around.
right.
Also reminds me of a line from one of Saturday Night Live writers that said, Eddie Murphy's success went to Joe Piscopo's head.
Yeah.
That was pretty good.
Yeah.
So she, you know, she made bad deals, and, you know, she would cancel things at the last minute where Groucho had been announced, and because her ego was bruised for some reason or other, she would decide Groucho shall not perform. You know, but he was past being in a position of saying, I think I'd be better off without. Every now and again, there'd be flashes of, you know, she would say something and he would say, this isn't your house, this is my house. And she wouldn't be prepared for those flashes of clarity and sharpness, but it was an extraordinary ride for me, certainly.
Yeah, I commend you. You know, you. I think even us. I think we're part of the last generation of people that, and I never did it, but I always wish I did. Was like actually be able to call people that you're a fan of. Like, I don't think you can really do that nowadays. Maybe emailing's probably a better bet, but even still, getting a hold of them.
Oh, you mean making a personal connection?
Yeah, like just
and,
calling.
I mean, Groucho's house had no security gate at the time. You could just drive into his driveway, walk up the steps, and ring the doorbell, which I would never have done. I've heard from people who say they did that, that would say, yeah, when I was visiting, we got a map of Stars homes, and I went up and I knocked on the door, and the maid in, and I thought, I would never have had the effrontery to just do that. And now, of course, people have, you know, bodyguards, and everything gets intercepted by fan mail services. But even in terms of, it's like when people would write to him asking for an autographed picture, he would pre-sign a stack of photos with a black Sharpie Groucho, and then I would fill in to Matt from above it, trying to emulate his handwriting. And I see a lot of those on eBay, and I can't believe I was as skilled a forger as I was apparently at 20. But the Grouchos were real. Or if they sent something to him of their own, a book, a photo, I would bring it in and he would write to Matt from on it. But because we got so many in any given day's mail, so many requests, he would sign. But the fact that he still personally signed all those photos,
Yeah.
you know, I remember leaving his bedroom one day with a stack of signed photos going back to my office, and I turned around and I said, on behalf of all the people who will never get a chance to meet you, thank you for taking the time to do this. And he said, well, I consider it part of my job. So, you know, he was a classy guy and he cared about the fans, and it meant a lot to him that he was hot again.
Yeah.
Getting crowds, you know, standing ovations and all this fan mail and stuff. And the re-syndication of You Bet Your Life happened around then. So people were getting nightly reminders of his quiz show cleverness. It was an interesting time.
When it comes to fans, I got to give you kudos too, because there's a story in the book about the fan that wrote it, the mother, I think, of the fan that wrote in and was like, hey, my son's quitting school because Groucho never went to high school. And he's like, well, if Groucho didn't have to go to high school, I don't have to go to high school. And that was a very nice letter that you wrote. And you like, you know,
that was one of the very rare times that I ever signed something with his name instead of having him sign it.
Yeah.
There was before the lawsuit against Erin Fleming after Groucho died, there was a big legal mess fighting over conservatorship of Groucho in his last year when he was still alive. And there was Erin, it was Erin against Groucho's son, Arthur. And that was when a lot of stuff came out about how abusive she could be and giving medication to Groucho beyond what was prescribed and all this. And I ended up having to give a deposition because I was in the house and I was witness to a lot of stuff in 3 years. And I thought it was going to take the better part of the day. But once I started talking, and I know this will surprise you that I started talking and didn't shut up. The deposition lasted 3 days. And I had a lot to say. And it was interesting because Arthur and his side distrusted me because I was part of Erin's hirees. You know, it's like, you're part of the Erin camp.
Yeah.
And Erin thought I was loyal blindly until my deposition, when she saw how much I had to say that was unflattering, simply by telling the truth, not by slamming her or tearing her apart. And I've always remained grateful to her. She was the one that literally hired me and changed my life. That doesn't change that. But again, truth is gray. It doesn't, you know, forgive all the other stuff. So one time her attorney said, did you ever sign Groucho's name? And I said, no, and I said, oh, no, wait. There was a time when, and it's like he inched forward like, I've got you now.
Yeah.
And I said, Groucho got a letter from the mother of a kid who said, my son wants to be a comedian like you. And he heard that you didn't go past like grade school. And so he felt like he doesn't need to go to high school. And so he dropped out. Could you possibly send him a note about that? And I knew that if I took that in and read it to Groucho, he would at best have signed a photo for the kid that just said like, to Tommy from Groucho.
Yeah.
No. So I thought, I will tried to substitute. So I typed a letter on Groucho stationery, and it said, you know, it's true that I never, and nothing I said in it was untrue.
Right.
I said, it's true that I never got further in school, but I regretted not being able to, and have tried to make up for it ever since. I've become a writer, and I read the latest bestsellers. Back then, I was living in the latest bestsellers. You can always become a comedian, but you can't always get an education. So if it were up to me, I would say go ahead and go back to school, but still keep up your interest. And then a couple weeks later, another letter arrived from the mother saying, I don't know how to thank you, Groucho. Your letter did the trick. He went back to school and is doing well. Well, I tell this story on the witness stand, and of course there's no way for her attorney to say, so you scoundrel, you forger, what made you think that you could, because it was this heartrending story of redeeming this wayward child. But anyway, yeah, that was an interesting moment.
A lot of people feel comedy can't really be learned. It's something you got to be kind of born with. Did Groucho ever get in any discussion like that around you of how he felt about that? If it's something you a muscle you can, you know, work out, or do you have to have it?
It's true. There are people that don't have a sense of humor, and you just can't make them understand timing or the proper way to phrase something. Why you can't say, one morning I shot an elephant in my pajamas, how an elephant with his massive girth could find a way to wriggle into pajamas that were made the size of a normal human is beyond me. If you can't see that. He did get a kick out of me, although I didn't try to compete with him because it wasn't fair given the condition he was in, although he was still making Grouchoisms every day. But one time I said, Groucho, we have the same middle name, because he was Julius Henry Marx and I'm Stephen Henry Stoliar. I said, we have the same middle name. And he said, well, just because we have the same middle name, that doesn't automatically make you funny. And I said, well, I don't know. When I tell people what my middle name is, they laugh. And he said, well, then they're just easy laughers. So, yeah, he did feel like you can't teach funny. And even, you know, Irving Brecker, who wrote At the Circus and Go West and co-wrote Meet Me in St. Louis and created Life of Riley and did a lot of other stuff. He and I were talking one day at Groucho's, and he was asking about my interests, and I said, oh, I'm taking screenwriting. And he scoffed. There's no other word for it. And it was that, how can they teach screenwriting? You know, I was hired as a youngster at MGM, and I learned screenwriting by sitting down at my typewriter and hammering it. And he's right that you can't be taught creativity, but he went a little too far, because you can be taught about beginning, middle, and end of a story, developing characters, having plot points along the way that throw the story into a surprising direction. You know, there are the mechanics of screenwriting, but yeah, you can't be taught to be a compelling storyteller, and you certainly can't be taught to have a flair for, you know, being able to be funny on cue or even given sufficient time.
Yeah, being able to go back and forth with Groucho has to be an incredible thing. I mean, it's, you know what I mean? That's so great, dude. I can't even describe how great that would be. It's just such like a,
I know.
You know what I mean?
And of course, and this is one of many things that piss me off these days. Retroactive political correctness, where people say, you know, I see You Bet Your Life. Why does he flirt with those young women and talk about the tight sweaters they're in? why does he and why does he have to be so insulting?
Yeah.
And it's like Groucho was a great admirer of T.S. Eliot, the British poet who was born in St. Louis, as I was, which doesn't automatically make me a poet. And Groucho was floored in the either late 50s or early 60s when he got essentially a fan letter from T.S. Eliot asking for a signed photo, and which started a correspondence. And then when Groucho visited England, they got together, and it meant a lot. And then it meant a lot to T.S. Eliot because he thought, it's like, I can't be funny like this guy. And he took the time and read. But there was the playful kidding in their correspondence. And now people look at it and they say, the feud, the Groucho T.S. Eliot feud. Look how dismissive Groucho is. And look at, and it's like, and T.S. Eliot was an anti-Semite, so he must have held that against. And I just want to shake these people by the shoulders and say, do you understand what kidding is?
Right.
So back to talking about the back and forth with Groucho. One day at the lunch table, Erin said, it's Steve's birthday this Friday. And Groucho said, well, we'll have to give him something, even if it's his discharge. And when he let me interview him and videotape him singing some songs for a class project at UCLA, I couldn't believe he said okay. And I interviewed him, and he sang a few songs and took us on a tour of his trophy table with his Oscar and his Emmy and all this. As we were wrapping up, I said, Groucho, I cannot possibly thank you enough for this. And he said, sure you can, don't take a salary. Now, someone reading that out of context would think, oh, so he thought in exchange for that, you should be working there free? No. So it does bother me, I kid, but it's only partly kidding, that these days, Chico would be double ridiculed. One, he wasn't a genuine Italian, so it's cultural appropriation. Why didn't they get a genuine Italian brother to play their Italian brother? And the other is, because he botches English, it makes fun of Italians. So even if they had a genuine Italian, he wouldn't be caught dead saying those things because it's an insult to Italian culture. Then you have Harpo. Why didn't they get a genuine mute? Why didn't they have a speech impaired person play that? And why is that funny? And why? And you would end up with, and Groucho, why does he flirt and say those insulting things to people? Doesn't he think of their feelings and how inappropriate that is? So of the four Marx Brothers, we would be left with Zeppo, who offended no one, but didn't really register much on the comedy meter, even though he had a great sense of humor and was in their best movies. I recently read, I try to keep track of what's being said or written about the Marx Brothers online or elsewhere. And this woman wrote an appreciation for Monkey Business, and she's fairly young. And I thought, this is very encouraging because, I'm rocketing towards 70 now. And I'm no longer shocked by people, even in their 40s or 50s, who just, Groucho and the Marx Brothers, it just doesn't register. It's too long ago. It's black and white. There's too much content now for them to bother. So it's always gratifying when someone says, oh, my granddaughter's 8 and she was watching this and she was giggling at Harpo. And it's like, the torch may actually be. So this woman wrote an appreciation of Monkey Business. And I thought, thank you. Thank you for getting it. Thank you. And then I get towards the end and she said, however, did anyone ever think there was something funny about watching Harpo chase girls all over the room? And I thought, well, the correct answer is yes. hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people over the years.
Yeah.
But she saw it as sexual aggression. No means no. And it, you know, I can't, that makes my blood boil, which is not healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that going off what you said, which no, a lot of people don't seem to put in context when films are made. Okay, like the time period, because every film ever made is not only a combination of what is written and all that and the actors involved, but it's a product of its time. So yeah, I mean, the Marx Brothers during that time, you can argue about sexual aggression now because things have changed. People have a different view on different aspects, but that does not dismiss what has already happened.
And they can't, but the thing that gets me is they hold it against them. It's like I had a discussion with someone about blackface, and they said, then it's like Fred Astaire is in blackface for Bojangles of Harlem, which is not a lampoon of black people with big, thick white lips and being stupid or lazy or something. It is a tribute to Bill Bojangles Robinson and is the centerpiece of Swing Time, which is one of Fred and Ginger's best films. But he does it in blackface because Bojangles is black. That's, and I hear people say he should have refused to do it. And it's like, you don't understand. It was so commonplace then. If you cancel all the people who ever did something in blackface, you would cancel Judy Garland and Joan Crawford and Fred Astaire and the Marx Brothers and Day at the Races and W.C. Fields and You Can't Cheat an Honest Man and Laurel and Hardy. And you just, so you can have a thing at the beginning, like on TCM, and say, please bear in mind that blackface was acceptable then and was commonplace, and you know, but people just get, it's like, it's just so offensive. It just, we can't, you know, TCM has that little featurette on the history of blackface, and I just want to throw something at the screen each time, because they'll show a clip of Astaire in Bojangles of Harlem, and the narrator will say, of course scenes like this offend us today. And it's like, it never did, and I'm not going to talk myself into being offended by it now.
Yeah.
You know, that for the Marx Brothers only made a baker's dozen of movies. The only film of theirs that was ever nominated for an Oscar was A Day at the Races, and the only part of the film that was nominated was All God's Chillin' Got Rhythm, with Harpo in the barnyard leading a bunch of happy black people dancing all around the barnyard. Who that man? That's Gabriel. That's Gabriel. That's Gabriel. Who that man? That's the only thing that was deemed Oscar worthy, and it didn't win in their whole canon. And now people want to cut that out altogether because it's offensive, it's demeaning. You know, why can't the black people have been in charge of the stables, and why couldn't they be doctors? And it's like, I can't, because I'm a lifelong history buff. I mean, as a kid and even as an adult, I loved fossils and Roman coins and things like that. And before I switched to motion picture television at UCLA, for the first 2 years, I was a history major. And I always see things in historical context and think, it's like just yesterday, I had lunch with my sister who just turned 82, which blows what's left of my mind because grandmothers are supposed to be 82, not sisters. But she was in town. She doesn't live down here, but she was visiting. And we were talking about the passage of time. And I said, I am now older than Spencer Tracy was, and guess who's coming to dinner? How is that possible? This white-haired, wrinkled old man and me. And I said, also, when I was a kid, I loved watching Combat, the World War II TV series with Vic Morrow and Rick Jason. Yeah. And at the time, World War II had ended 20 years earlier. Well, 20 years from now backwards was 2004, which was after 9/11. And it's like, how can 2004 to now be the same as World War II to combat? So I'm always intrigued by time, and in fact, I mentioned in the book that in addition to fully soaking in the reality that I was with Groucho Marx, that same guy in the grease paint mustache and Duck Soup and in the mustache and You Bet Your Life and all that, he was someone who knew so many to have been friends with George Gershwin and James Thurber and W.C. Fields. And then the third level was, this is a man from 1890. This is a man, he was American, but he was Victorian in the sense that Queen Victoria was still ruling when he was born and would until he was 11. So she was current news. Gilbert and Sullivan were still writing operettas when he was born. So his firsthand memories went from before the Wright brothers to after the moon landing with Neil Armstrong, which is just a jaw-dropping swath of history. He talked about when the Marx Brothers were doing I'll Say She Is, which was their first hit show that wasn't just vaudeville scenes touring in vaudeville. And he said, in 1923, President Harding suddenly died. He hadn't been sick. He just died. And the whole nation was thrown by this. And he said that night we had to go on stage, and we were playing in a theater that had an aluminum roof, and it was raining. And all we could hear the whole night was the sound of the raindrops hitting the aluminum roof, because nobody was in a mood to laugh because the president had died. And it was like he had brought to life this one moment from 1923 that would otherwise have been lost to the ages. And that was what he remembered, was the president was dead, just the ping, ping, ping on the aluminum roof. So he was this living time capsule. But yeah, I get pretty annoyed when people are myopic and can only see, this is currently out of favor, this must stop, this must be canceled, like colored was the preferred term for Black people for many years, and nothing was deemed offensive about it. Then suddenly Negro was correct. And anyone who said colored was seen as a racist. And the United Negro College Fund was formed, and you hear Martin Luther King talk about the Negro today and the Negro. Now, if you say Negro, you might as well be some hayseed, hillbilly, racist Klansman.
Yeah.
It's the terminology that changed, but no one takes, what is the context? Are you using it derogatorily? Because you could say, if you wanted to, I think they should take all the African Americans and send them to Madagascar. Well, that's much more offensive than saying the Negro Baseball League had some of the finest players, Anyway, I'll hop down off my soapbox.
Oh man, I'm with you. I remember the first time Groucho ever popped on my radar was via All in the Family. Michael Stivic would always dress up for him in every occasion, pretty much. You know what I mean? And I know that like you got a good chance to get at Groucho's 86th birthday to sit down with Carol O'Connor for a good amount of time. And previous to that, I think the 85th birthday, I think Sally Struthers was there as well. And you guys
and Carol O'Connor.
And Carol O'Connor, and you guys talked about like how All in the Family's allowed, why All in the Family was allowed to get away with so much stuff that other shows couldn't, right? Do you remember any?
I remember saying that I was an early watcher of the show.
Yeah.
And I convinced a lot of my high school classmates to watch, and that one of my yearbooks says, someone signed it saying, "Thanks for All in the Family," like I had anything to do with it. And Sally Struthers and I went through other famous people with SS, since I'm Steve Stoliar and she as their initials. I don't remember talking about what they got away with, and All in the Family was still being made. It was still
Yeah.
in production then, so it wasn't.
Legendary.
And I later got to meet Rob Reiner, and he said, I went to high school with Groucho's daughter Melinda. Tell her I said hello. And I said, well, I'm not really in touch with her. I haven't been in. Well, if you talk to her, tell her I said hello. So collect the whole set of All in the. Oh, and Norman Lear.
Yeah.
I got to meet and talk to went during the reboot of One Day at a Time, and he was Groucho's friend. And I didn't see him back in the 70s, but I at least got to see him pushing 100 and still in charge. Just again, remarkable what some very elderly people are capable of now. And
Yeah.
and it wasn't so much the case. You didn't have people living to 100 in the 70s, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, well, with All in the Family, it's such a yeah. You throw that on. They tried to reboot it recently or do like a special or something like that, and I don't think it went over as well. But like, that's such an important show, and it's like the things that discussed, and yeah, they're Archie will say these like horrible things race related, but he's always played off to be not intelligent. You know what I mean? Like a goofball type character, and I think that's why it worked. But yeah, I love that show. I think
You
that
would have a hard time doing it now.
yeah.
And there are so many people that are just like Archie now, a disturbing number of people who
Yeah.
wouldn't understand why it's funny, that it would be a documentary to them. Look, in Duck Soup, when Groucho's talking to Louis Calhern, he says, I guess I was a little headstrong, but I come by it easily. My father was a little headstrong, and my mother was a little Armstrong, and the headstrongs married the Armstrongs, and that's why darkies were born. Now, there was at the time a song called And That's Why Darkies Were Born that had all these convoluted lyrics about the so-and-so and the so-and-so went to the so-and-so and the so-and-so, and the bottom line of each verse was, and that's why darkies were born. Well, in and of itself, it sounds horrible. How could Groucho say that? Why would he agree to say that? Doesn't he realize how offensive it was? But it's like, you know, this was one random line in a movie that was not meant to last a century. It was current stuff, you know, current political references, current cultural references, song references, plays. In the stage version of Animal Crackers, this isn't in the film, but in the stage version, in the scene where Chico's playing the piano and Groucho is tossing out suggestions like play Somewhere My Love Lies Sleeping with a male chorus. He also, in the play, said, play, I'm looking at the world through colored Rosie's glasses, and all I see are black specks. Because there was a song called I'm Looking at the World Through Rose-Colored Glasses. So he switched it to colored Rosie's glasses. Also in the stage play of Coconuts, Chico's character is Willie the Wop.
Yeah.
And it played on Broadway to great acclaim and critical acclaim, and no one said, don't you realize that the Italian-American community finds it? So it's like, I wish people could loosen up, but I feel like I'm swimming uphill swimming upstream a lot, or swimming uphill, which is even more difficult than swimming upstream.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. It's like those folks came from a time when the racial stuff was like really bad. So like them making a joke about it isn't really that big of a deal. And I always feel like comedy is the best medicine. So like if you can get everybody laughing together, you're actually.
But they don't now. I mean, that's why Seinfeld stopped entertaining at colleges, because there were so many jokes and attitudes that had come to be seen as inappropriate that instead of laughs, he was getting sharp intakes of breath from shocked people or hissing from uptight women who found that offensive. And yes, I mean, it's like, I don't know if Carlin said, if you're not offending someone, you're not doing something right. And
Yeah.
and there really is almost always someone, there's some sense of superiority in comedy. Sometimes it's self-deprecating, which that's fine, and sometimes it's like dumb blondes or Asians that drive too slowly or whatever the stereotypes are, and you just can't anymore. And I think it puts a real filter and a handcuff on people trying to do stand-up if they're worried about how will this sit with them. And it's too bad, because there should be, there should be freedom, but you get canceled and shunned and not healthy.
Yeah, if you're going after Seinfeld, I mean, that really tells you there's a problem, because he's one of the most cleanest comedians out there. You know what I mean?
I believe that comedy is the ultimate equalizer. I mean,
well, that's what Matt was saying, but it isn't an equalizer if everyone isn't laughing at it, because you get the people going or ooh or oh, you see what the late night talk show hosts, when they'll push the envelope a little bit, and you'll hear the audience go ooh, and it's like, that was too much, or Che on SNL's movie weekend updates, like, oh, that I went too far with that. It's like the audience will let you know. They are the ultimate deciders. You can't. It's like comedians can't walk off a stage after not getting laughs and say, oh, the audience was a bunch of idiots. It's like, no, your job is to figure out what will make them laugh. But when there's such a knee-jerk reaction now without any thinking, it's like, oh, we heard this word, therefore you must be silenced. It's very constrictive.
Do you think it's going to do with like the whole social media generation, where everybody can just voice their opinion? That everybody goes, well, I have to have an opinion on this. I have to speak my truth. You know what I mean? And be that person.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is when they become influencers, and I don't know how you do that. Go to influence school or major in influencing college. But if they were all just random nut bars sitting there saying, well, I think it should all be painted green, fine. But when it snowballs and becomes a movement, and it's like you end up forcing people to be yanked before a tribunal and made to apologize or answer for their egregious missteps, or else they're canceled. That's when the social media can be, dangerous, because it doesn't matter if there's truth to it. If the snowball has gotten big enough, it's going to roll over you unless you get out of the way. This is depressing. But thank you for allowing me to depress myself.
We'll pop into fun things like George Burns. I know George Burns, very good friend of Groucho, always coming over for lunch and stuff like that, smoking the cigars, even though Groucho gave the cigars up. How is George Burns as a person? Like, we all love him.
Oh, I would see Burns was coming over for lunch in '74. This was before the Sunshine Boys, which led to that whole renaissance of oh God and Going in Style and his Oscar. But I still full well appreciated George Burns as half of Burns and Allen on radio and in film and their TV show and his stand-up, So I had no problem appreciating who he was, and I was a little nervous. And so the doorbell rang, and I went and I answered the door, and there was this little man with a toupee and black glasses and a big smile on his face. Never spoke to him, never saw him before. And he looked up at me and he said, "Hi, you want to live a long time? Become an actor. You'll live to be an old man like Groucho with me." Okay, let's eat. And he shuffled into the dining room, and they greeted each other. And I sat there again, I was welcome at the table. There was no sense of the help eats in the kitchen, young man. So I was always welcome and would either just listen or participate when I thought I had something to add. And it was remarkable listening to them because they would talk about vaudeville and where specific. It's like, well, that was B.F. Keith's in Chicago. No, it wasn't, George. That was at the Orpheum Theater in Indianapolis, because you're misremembering that. That was B.F. Keith's in Chicago. And they're talking about something that happened in 1920. And then after lunch, Burns took out a cigar and pushed it into the plastic holder and puffed, and he said, "I never smoke expensive cigars. All I care is if it fits the holder. Now, Milton Berle pays $2 a piece for his cigar. If I paid that much, I'd go to bed with it before I'd smoke." So he was just charming. He also had an astonishing memory. I had, by some chance, brought with me an original still from Paramount in '34 of him and Gracie, and he signed it to me. And I said, by the way, in our film class, we recently saw International House, which was one of those all-star Paramount things. And Fields was in it, and Cab Calloway, and Burns and Allen, and Lugosi, and Franklin Penguin. Just a crazy, just one of those pre-code early Paramounts that are just a delight.
Yeah.
And he said, I gave Fields a gag for that. It involved a tea bag and a coffee pot. And I told him about it, and he liked it, and he put that in the picture. It was like, I had no idea. And now whenever I see International House and Fields has the gag with the coffee, I think George Burns gave him that gag, and he used it in the picture.
Yeah.
And then, so that was in '74. In '84, I was living in New York writing for Dick Cavett, and he was part of a TV special saluting the Palace Theater, the great vaudeville New York Broadway. And it was an all-star thing that had people playing famous people who played the Palace. And in Cavett's case, he played Fred Allen. And it also had people who were old enough to have played the Palace, which included Burns. And backstage, I reminded him that we had had lunch at Groucho's in '74. And he said, oh, yes, that woman was there working on a book. And I thought, oh, my God, you're right. Charlotte Chandler was there then. And it's like I had forgotten that she was there, but he had, I mean, think about all of the lunches he had had in 10 years. And of course, he wasn't starstruck by Groucho. They were peers, all, Jack Benny and Bob Hope and all those guys. That woman was there working on a book. You're right. So what an amazing. And Cavett and I were up in one of those balcony seats that overlooked the stage. There was a rehearsal. And Burns came out and sang Young at Heart. And it was so poignant and bittersweet to watch. And if you should survive to 105. And Cavett and I were both thinking, who knows how much longer this charming man has. But he had like 20 years left. He lived a long time, and really only died because he slipped and hit his head, which accelerated his down. But he was in very sharp shape until the very end. But this wonderful moment of Cavett and me watching Burns on the stage of the Palace, and on the back wall of the Palace Theater, there was an old heating pipe. And I can't call it concentric because it wasn't round, but it was like a maze, and that heated the backstage area. It was this big pipe that inside itself, which was there. And then when I went home, I have one of George Burns' books, and I looked in, and there was a picture of him backstage at the Palace Theater. And he's like playing cards with Eddie Cantor. and there's that same rectangular pipe that hadn't, I mean, it was clearly the same one.
Yeah.
So that, again, it's that history thing where wow, they were on that spot that I stood, but when they were young and headliners.
Speaking of George Burns singing, he has I got a record of his that I love called "I Wish I Was 18 Again." It's such, from beginning to end, such a great album and whole. I love. I always tell people, if you see that record, man, pick it up. That's a great record.
He was great. He really was.
You brought up the great Dick Cavett. You know what I mean? I know you got some history with him. You got to correspond with him for a long time and spend some time with him. What's Dick like?
Well, in late 74, there's a book that came out called Cavett, which is essentially a running into conversation between Cavett and his Yale roommate, Christopher Porterfield, who also became an editor at Time and then one of the producers of the PBS Cavett Show. And one day I was in my office at Groucho's house, and he came shuffling into the room with an advance copy of the book. And he said, "Read this, you'll enjoy it." Again, which was very gratifying for me to think that he was in his room thinking, Steve will like this. And Groucho had provided a dust jacket blurb. There were two dust jacket blurbs on the back, one from Woody Allen and one from Groucho Marx, about how great Cavett in the book is. So at the time, I wasn't really a fan of Cavett's. I thought of him as like the thinking man's Carson. And I had seen Cavett shows, but I didn't like make a habit of staying. But I thought, I'm going to have to read this because Groucho's going to say, "What'd you think of it?" And I don't want to say I never got around to it. So I took it home. And from the first page, I related to this guy. And I thought, oh, am I so wrong about him? I thought he was this Yale, New York snob that wouldn't give me the time of day. But it's like, both of us had mothers who died when we were young. Both of us were nervous around girls. Both of us were obsessed with the classic comedians of the 30s. Both of us. And I just thought, if I ever met this guy, I bet we'd hit it off. But I'm this kid that goes to UCLA and lives in Tarzana, and he's off with his show in New York. And in the book, Cavett talks about the day he met Groucho at George S. Kaufman's funeral in 61, and how he struck up a conversation with Groucho, and there were subsequent conversations, and he would go home and write down snippets of just a few words to remind him of the stories, and that it frustrates him because he still had the slips of paper, but no longer remembered what some of them were. And he mentioned a couple of them in the book. But because of my closeness to Groucho, I thought I knew what the stories were. So I stole his address out of Groucho's little black book, and I wrote him a letter and said, "I'm working for Groucho," and he gave me your book, which I love. Here are what I think might be those stories. And I get back a letter that said, "Dear Steve, you were uncannily on the nose with your two guesses. This is hasty because I'm about to get on a plane, but write again and I'll answer again and better." And that began a correspondence that led to phone calls. And he had told me I may speak freely about the political situation between Erin and Arthur and all that was going on. It wasn't going to get back to anyone. So I would fill him in on what was happening. And then when Groucho died, I thought, well, I guess that's it for my Cavett connection, because I'm no longer a pipeline into all the intrigue at Groucho's, and he's got better things to do. And the weekend that Groucho died, I had also started working at Universal in the steno pool, typing scripts, because the Groucho job had become part-time and I had graduated and my dad was bugging me to get a job. So he called me at Universal And he said, listen, just because Groucho's gone, I hope we're not going to lose touch. And by the way, I hope you don't mind, but I've shown some of your letters to Woody, and he says they're very well written. And I like emptied the urine out of my shoes. And sure enough, and I would send him little short things that I had, little like short humorous short stories. And then in the summer of '82, he had signed with HBO to host a series called HBO Magazine, which was like an Entertainment Tonight of what's happening. And they asked him who he wanted to write it that wouldn't be a Writers Guild member. And he said, oh, this young writer in California, Steve Stoliar. And they thought, well, if Dick Cavett wants Steve Stoliar. And so I moved to New York. The movers, the Beacon's movers could not understand why I would want to move from California to New York, because they only knew people going in the other way.
Yeah.
And I ended up having this astonishing 2.5-year gig until work dried up and I got a better offer to come back to LA. But the whole Manhattan experience of hanging out with Cavett, meeting Woody Allen, bumming around town, just going for walks and discovering the city, I loved it. And if I came very close to joining the Letterman staff, and if I had, I would have made just enough to get by, and I could have turned down the more lucrative LA job just to stay in New York, but I didn't get it, and I did get the other. But Cavett and I had many adventures, and I got to stay at his Montauk house one summer, and it was just wonderful. And getting to meet Marshall Brickman and Nora Ephron, and I mean, just all these Bianca Jagger, people living down the beach, all these beautiful people, and comfortably. As a matter of fact, we had lobsters one evening, and Marshall Brickman was over, and I remember thinking, it's so ironic because he co-wrote Annie Hall, and here we are in the kitchen with live lobsters.
Yeah.
And I was looking at one of the lobsters, and it was just, you know, the feelers were slowly going up and down. They hadn't been put in boiling water yet. And I said to Marshall, what do you think he's thinking? And Marshall said, probably vague shapes. And I remember thinking, you know, he's probably he answered it literally.
Yeah.
And if you could key into what the lobster, it was probably vague shapes. It's like, I'm tired, I'm out of water, I don't know what.
Yeah.
Vague shapes. Anyway, so we're still in touch, and he ended up writing the introduction to Raised Eyebrows, My Years Inside Groucho's House. And then this was such a remarkable turn of events. As I mentioned, the book Cavett had blurbs by Woody Allen and Dick Cavett and Groucho. Then Cavett's next book, Eye on Cavett, was talking about Groucho and mentioned me. And I thought, how weird that now I'm in a book, not just reading a book.
Yeah.
And then when I wrote Raised Eyebrows, he wrote the intro and also gave me a dust jacket blurb. And Woody Allen gave me a dust jacket blurb saying it's one of the best books about a show business icon I've ever read. And I thought, so here is this book on Groucho that I wrote with blurbs from Cavett and Woody, after the Cavett book had blurbs from Woody and Groucho. It's something. I do spend time musing on things like that because I think it fascinates me about how cyclical and strange things work out.
Yeah, I remember one of your adventures with Cavett was to the set of Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors, where he had his big cameo.
Yeah, when he would come out here, he would call and say, I'm over at Paramount. If you want, I got to meet Tom Hanks on a movie, and I couldn't tell from the scene they were shooting if the movie was going to be any good. But I knew one thing for sure. They were never going to keep the name Forrest Gump because it was a ridiculous name, and Andy Gump was the name of a chemical toilet company. So the only thing I could tell for sure was that name, once again, I had my thumb on the pulse of Hollywood.
Yeah.
But, so he was doing Nightmare on Elm Street. Was it 3?
I think it's 3. Yeah, Dream Warriors. Yeah.
And oh my, it was in a little studio. And in the scene, he is interviewing, he is himself as the host of the Dick Cavett show, interviewing Zsa Zsa Gabor, who is herself a guest on the Dick Cavett show. And in the finished film, what she says something like, well, a lot of young actresses come and they want my advice and they want to know how to become an actress. And you know what I tell them, Dick? You know what my advice is? And Cavett in the film morphs into
Freddy.
What's his name?
Freddy Krueger.
Freddy.
Yeah.
Saying, I don't give a fuck what you think. And then he slashes her face or beheads her or something. Well, they had to do that by shooting a bunch of takes of Zsa Zsa saying, and so for advice, you know what I tell them, Dick? And Cavett would say, I don't give a fuck what you think. I don't give a fuck what you think. In order to match it, and then they would sit Freddy Krueger down and he would say, I don't give. And so when they finished shooting it, Cavett was on his way back to the dress room and he said, you have no idea how cathartic that was. I never did have Zsa Zsa on my show. And I talked to Zsa Zsa about the Queen of Outer Space. And she said, when I made that film, nobody saw it. It was nothing. But now it's this big cult film, and I hear more about that than any of the other pictures I did, The Queen of Outer Space. And England, Freddy Krueger, was in his full makeup and outfit with his razor fingers. And a friend of mine who collects horror memorabilia, I thought I would be remiss if I didn't ask. So I asked for an autograph, and I said, could you put to whatever his name was, Ron, and indicate that you're signing this with your glove on, so he'd know it. So he put to Ron with glove, like with love.
Nice.
And then I've seen autographs of his where he signed that, and I thought, he probably thought, that's a pretty good, instead of best wishes or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was great fun. But watching Cavett say, I don't give a fuck what you think. Zsa Zsa Gabor. It was so
Yeah. So I want to jump back real quick to meeting Tom Hanks on the set of Forrest Gump. My goodness. Does he stay in character? How does that work?
No. There was a scene where Forrest Gump was going to be appearing on the Dick Cavett show. And Dick Cavett was interviewing John Lennon. And they had a John Lennon look-alike, sound-alike. Again, so they could match it with the vintage footage. I think in the finished film, they didn't use any of the impersonator. They just somehow manipulate. Now, of course, you can do anything, but this was, it doesn't seem that long ago, but it was long enough ago that CGI was not happening. Anyway, and so he's talking to Lennon, and Hanks is one of the guests on the show because of his amazing feat of running or whatever he was on the show for. And there was a crew member who was genuinely from the South, just like a gripper electrician. But Hanks was taking advantage of him to learn to fine-tune pronunciation. And I remember the guy teaching him how to say church. I was in church, church. And then Cavett introduced me to Hanks and mentioned my flair for impersonations. And I remember we traded off on a few. I don't remember who we did, but we traded off on a few. I mean, this is always the case when you hear about it. Very unassuming, very down to earth, no ego, just a regular guy.
Yeah.
And then they got back to shooting that scene. But that was my one brush with Hank. And of course, they didn't change the name. And, you know, it occurred to me that Dick Cavett has the distinction of having appeared in 2 Best Pictures of the Year, Forrest Gump and Annie Hall. And again, in Annie Hall, he played himself with Albie Singer guest starring. And so many people think that was just a clip from an ABC show where Woody Allen was guest, which he frequently did. And Cavett said Woody's genius was in hiring a guy to dress up as an admiral, to sit on the couch and not say anything, as if he had been the first guest and Woody was the second. And it's so convincing. People say, well, that doesn't count. That was just, no. Cavett had to learn his lines. And so he was in 2 Best Pictures. It also occurs to me that Eddie Rochester Anderson was in 2 adjacent Best Pictures of the Year. He was in You Can't Take It With You in 38 and Gone with the Wind in 39. So of all the people who have never appeared in a Best Picture, Rochester was in 2 in consecutive years. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
I'm afraid the crystal has gone cloudy.
Well, you got you know, I know Groucho, he gave you like a recommendation to help get you into the schooling for script writing, you know what I mean? And you did you went through the deal and you became, you know, started writing for television, right?
Yeah.
Originally?
Yeah, I mean, I just seem to have a flair for that. I don't really have any skills. I can't fix anything. I'd hate numbers. I could never have done it. So in medicine, I couldn't handle blood. And so I've alternated between being writing for television and writing books and voice work. And it's been an interesting ride. Not for the squeamish. I mean, I'm not rolling in moolah. We are currently working on doing a film adaptation of Raised Eyebrows with Jeffrey Rush as the elderly Groucho and Sienna Miller as Erin Fleming. And the director is Orrin Moverman, who co-wrote Love and Mercy, the Brian Wilson biopic, and was Oscar nominated for The Messenger with Woody Harrelson. And he's a great guy. And we co-wrote the script, and he's going to direct it. And it's really, everything is set except adequate funding, which is really tough nowadays. There was the 1-2 punch of COVID shutting everything down, and then the 1-2 punch of the Writers and Screen Actors Guild strikes. And it's like Hollywood is still, plus the other factor, which may be even greater than those two, is that a lot of the streaming services and studios overextended themselves in investing in all sorts. It's like Netflix went crazy funding this and this and this. And now because there's 10 trillion, you know, oh, you have Hulu, don't you? Well, you have this plus, don't you? They're all rethinking, you know, tightening their belts. So it's hard, but we are actively working on getting it. And as soon as we get enough to get going, we'll get going on the movie version, and it will be beyond, I mean, talk about how surreal it was to have the Cavett book and then the dust jacket and all this stuff. To be on the set of a film based on something I experienced with people playing people I knew, including someone playing me at 20.
Yeah.
Whatever meta means, that's it.
Yeah.
So I don't know when that will be. My fingers are crossed and nothing is guaranteed, but it is ready to go, except for that minor technicality of funding.
Finances. Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. Matt and I will pull our money together, and
Thank you.
We're good
and
like
we'll
that.
make it happen, right, Matt?
It's a relatively inexpensive
Yeah.
film as films go.
Yeah. You did some docs too, of course. You know what I mean? Shemp.
Yeah, I worked at a small production company for a while, producing and often voicing pop culture documentaries on John Lennon and the Marx Brothers and Presley and different people.
Shemp. Did Shemp too, which was
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Yes, I was very proud of calling it Shemp Cocktail. I can come up with better titles than the stuff that's actually in the shows, but
Yeah. The
So-
Elvis, of course, Elvis is like, when it comes to the death, when Groucho died, I think Elvis died, 3 days later or something like that?
every August I am re-traumatized by all of the Presley salutes on TCM and all of the it has now been years since the king left the building, a tragic day. Now let us play these songs. And it's like in 77 when Presley died. I mean, it was a shock to everyone except the people who knew him, who were wondering what was keeping him alive
Right.
because of his own excesses in terms of drugs and eating habits and lifestyle. But he was 42, which is criminally young, although at least he, the other rock people died at 27, Morrison and Jimmy and Janis.
Janice.
And so they're just, lines all the way down the street at Graceland of grief-stricken people bringing flowers. And then 3 days later, after all the false alarms along the way, I mean, there were many times when Groucho would have a health setback, and I would think, this is it. I knew it was coming. I wasn't kidding myself. It's been a hell of a ride. And then he would snap back from it. But he really was winding down. And in the last year, he had fallen, broken his hip, and was in a wheelchair, was having respiratory problems. And so he was in the hospital for what turned out to be the last time, and did in fact die 3 days later. But as I remember, the news coverage was essentially, and famed comedian Groucho Marx died of pneumonia today at age 86. We'll be back with more coverage of the death of the king after these important messages.
Yeah.
And Time magazine had letters from Cavett and Woody that said variations on, was it our imagination or did Mr. Marx get short shrift in your magazine while Presley got all this? So yeah, every August I'm reminded that Elvis died. Oh yeah, and then Groucho died.
Yeah.
As I said in the book, there were other kings on other thrones.
Yeah. Yeah, I know Rob Zombie and I think it was Devil's Rejects. He has a big speech in there about it, because all the characters from
Captain Spaulding
and the Firefly family, they're all from like the Marx Brothers things, and he goes.
And Rob was originally going to direct this, and
yeah,
which was really that was really, I mean, that's its own other story. But one of my Facebook friends years ago said, "Did you see the latest issue of?" And it was like Plugged In magazine or something. I said, "What is that?" And he said, "It's a British heavy metal magazine." And I said, "Oh, I have a lifetime subscription to that." My taste is classic rock and Gershwin and all. No. And he said, "Well, there's an interview with Rob Zombie, and he's asked what his favorite book is. And he said, Raised Eyebrows, My Years Inside Groucho's House." And I thought, I can't believe, because I knew he was this horror director. And I remember my late wife had been watching TV, and she said, I saw this movie and there were all these people were named Captain horror movie, Captain Spaulding in the Fire. So she knew about him before I did.
Yeah.
And I thought I at least want to connect to say, hey, out of the blue, thanks, with no thoughts about movie. And someone knew someone that had been a guitarist, and they managed. And I got this email that said, hey, I hear you're looking for me. Hit me up. And he said, have you thought of doing this as a movie? Because this is just the kind of thing I'm looking for to get away from horror. And I said, well, I do have a script. And he said, do you think it would be okay for me to read it? And he said, give me a few days. So I emailed it to him, and like 2 hours later, he called me back and said, this is fucking great. Let's do it. However we go about this, the changes I would want you could do in 2 seconds. Let's do it. And I ended up becoming very defensive of him, because everyone would say, oh, no, you're kidding. It's like, you're going to hand over your cow for this handful of magic beans from a guy that makes slasher pictures.
Yeah.
And, but when I got to know Rob, he was this down-to-earth guy. He didn't want to turn it into a Rob Zombie movie. He loved the story, and he wanted to do this bittersweet story of a kid and his hero. And I mean, we were on the same page. It was a very, and I ended up being very defensive, and even wrote an op-ed to the Hollywood Reporter about all of the mainstream directors that started out in horror. James Cameron and all the Corman people. And I said, and even Robert Wise started out with Curse of the Cat people and ended up with West Side Story and Sound of Music. So, but it was very hard to convince people not to judge someone by what they've done, not what they're capable. And ultimately, we had trouble finding a leading lady, because again, that resistance, it's like, I don't know, he's a horror guy, and funding. And so the production company that had optioned it had to say goodbye to Rob, but still wanted to do it. And they brought aboard Oren Moverman, with whom I also get along great. So I've been very lucky that I haven't been pushed aside.
Yeah.
But it was sad and frustrating for Rob, because he really did want to do this. And people have said, boy, you really dodged a bullet. And it's like, the truth is, we'll never know how it would have turned out. But he really was serious about it, and was a great guy, and and still is. So it was an interesting, also attending his shows, which were great fun. I enjoyed them just the same. And I was at one of his parties, and do you know who John Five is?
Yeah, it's a guitarist. Yeah.
It's his guitarist, who I found to be maybe the most astonishing guitarist I ever saw play live. I mean, truly, there's a perception that heavy metal guitaring is just loud screeching and feedback and all that. His plucking and apparently he grew up watching Hee Haw and loving all the banjo stuff and all. So at the party, I went up to him and I said, I am a living fossil, not unlike the horseshoe crab or the coelacanth lungfish found off the coast of Madagascar. But even I have to say that you're the finest guitarist I've ever seen. And my tastes tend to run to classic rock and Gershwin. And he said, Gershwin? And I thought, oh, you kids today, you don't. And he said, I got rhythm in my show. It's on YouTube. And it's like, he said Gershwin because of the common bond. And I thought it was like, what kind of a name is that? And I went and I looked on YouTube, and he does this amazing embellishment beginning with the basic da 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 da, and then just which taught me again, don't judge a book by its cover. That John 5, who puts lightning in his mouth during his playing and is just an amazing heavy rock guy, likes Gershwin. So.
Hell yeah. I got another shock rock question you could probably clear up. I heard rumor that Alice Cooper used to go drink beers with Groucho when Groucho had insomnia. Is that true or no?
The color of truth is gray. There is no yes or no to this. There's only explaining. Groucho and Alice became friends around 74, shortly before I came aboard. Erin Fleming felt it would be mutually beneficial for Groucho to be seen with young, hot people to show that he's a hep cat and not obsolete. And then the younger people had the classiness of being photographed with Groucho. So you get that shot of Queen presenting Groucho with a gold LP of A Night at the Opera, which hung in his den for a while. And he hung out with Elton John. It doesn't mean he liked their music. People have made the mistake of saying, wow, imagine an old guy like that liking. It's like, no, he hated rock and roll. He thought it was all noise. He didn't make the distinctions. I mean, a lot of, my dad was the same way. It was like you'd have to play. It's like, but listen to Michelle or Yesterday. It's like, it's all, yeah. Can't sit down and know it. So Groucho in no way enjoyed their music. However, in the case of Alice, he got a kick out of his presentation as a showman. And I think said something along the lines of, this man may single-handedly bring back vaudeville. So that was cool. And he would show up at some of Groucho's parties. I didn't meet him. And I think he sort of rotated away from Groucho's circle not long after I came aboard. Now, Groucho was never much of a drinker, even in his younger days. He had contempt for people with a drinking problem. He did not like the idea of not having control over your mind. So he had great contempt for the what do you call party drugs and all that that the hippies were into.
Yeah.
He thought it was a waste of time and it didn't interest him. So he did not drink except very occasionally when he was younger. In the 70s, when he was in his 80s, he did not drink anything ever. He had medical problems and was on a number of medications. So the part about we would drink 6-packs, at best was I would drink 6-packs in Groucho's room. The part about Groucho calling him up to come over, it doesn't feel quite right. I think he may, as some have done, embellished or exaggerated their relationship. I tried to play it as accurately as I could in my book. I mean, I could have inflated my importance because there would have been so few people in a position to say, I was there and he didn't do that and that wasn't. But I thought just laying it down in the order it happened as I remembered it was interesting enough for that. So the idea, also, so people started asking me about the Alice Cooper thing, and I'm not sure, he had said it quite a few years ago, but for some reason, again, social media picked up that picture of Alice and Groucho and Alice with a Budweiser in his hand. which was at a charity event in '74 that I was at, but still didn't meet Alice there. Somehow it has been reinvigorated with the added detail that Alice says, and I would stay until he'd fall asleep, and I would take the lit cigar out of his mouth and put it on. Groucho stopped smoking cigars in '72, 2 years before he met Alice, again for his health. And I was pleased for two reasons. One, I always hated the smell of cigars. So even though it was his trademark, I personally was glad that he didn't smoke, although many of Groucho's friends did, and that was fun. The other thing is, I asked, and Groucho said he really didn't miss it. And I was glad, because it would have been sad if he was craving this, like someone who hadn't stopped smoking cigarettes and went crazy when anyone would smoke around them. So this thing about taking the cigar out of his mouth, again, now I also understand that Alice was heavily into a lot of stuff back then, and in his mind may very well remember that. But my best take on it is that there's little sprinklings of truth, like their friendship and spending time together, and Alice drinking beer, but not the rest. This is very much akin to the Skidoo story, and I'm blanking on his name. There was a writer who said, I dropped acid with Groucho while he was making Skidoo in 1968. Well, that did not ring true with me, because again, he had contempt for recreational drugs and the whole hippie culture as a rule, and its music and the long hair and all that.
Yeah.
And also, his generation was terrified of LSD. It's true that Cary Grant had used it for a while and said it was interesting how it expanded your mind. So he did do that. But for the most part, that generation would hear stories about people who went crazy and killed themselves, jumped off buildings. There was a story about Art Linkletter's daughter or son that had a bad trip and committed suicide. So if Groucho was wary of taking a drink and had contempt for recreational drugs, the idea that on the set of a movie, not even in the comfort and safety of his home, by this guy he didn't know, would give him this tab that was going to expand his mind when he was 79 or what. Every part of that rings false. And I have never talked to anyone who was around him at that time who thought that felt like it had any kind of chance. But again, as with Alice, this guy, and again, I'm forgetting his name, was heavily into drugs at that time. I think David Crosby said, if you remember the 60s, you weren't there. And so people are always saying, oh, wow, that's so cool. Groucho dropped acid. Oh, I would love to have been there. And then I'm this spoil sport coming along and saying, well, actually, if we take a look at the details, they don't match up chronologically. And I'm sorry, but I feel compelled to answer truthfully, like Mr. Memory in the 39 Steps, even if it cost him his life.
Yeah.
And so people will say, will you clear this up? And if it isn't what they want to hear, I'm sorry, but as long as I am alive, there's so many Groucho quotes, and I keep popping the balloons. He apparently has said more famous things posthumously than he ever said while he was alive. But people, it's like they don't want to hear the truth. And I think about, I have this wonderful letter from Steve Allen that ends with, I hope this sets the record straight, which is more than my Pioneer turntable can do. And it's like that. I feel it's my unasked for mission to try to set whatever record straight I can based on my own firsthand, not, well, I read this somewhere or I heard a guy talk about the thing with the uh, and and that's what I'm doing here and elsewhere.
Yeah. I got two more questions for you. I know we've kept you so long. You did the documentary with Shemp and then so much time with Groucho. Like I was curious, like in the book it talks about how like Georgie Jessel would come by and Groucho would give him some money.
Yeah.
He'd give his brother I forget
Zeppo.
what Zeppo money. It seems like Groucho was really well off, but I always heard that like the Three Stooges kind of got robbed on there. Did they kind of die broke? You know what I mean? Like,
I
what
don't
was
know if they did. I don't know that much about their complete history. I know that when they signed with Columbia to do the shorts, I think they thought they had a good deal and it was regular money. And so they didn't press Harry Cohn for raises along the way. And I mean, they were there from like 33 to 58.
Yeah.
And let's see, and there was no such thing as residuals then. So it was wholly owned by Columbia. So when it was sold, the shorts were sold to TV, they didn't get that. And then, after Curly died and after Shemp died, and they started to do those mediocre features in the late 50s and early 60s with Joe DeRita, the deals were better, but it was only for a short time. And then I think better deals were made about merchandising and that sort of thing. Larry died at the Motion Picture Home in Woodland Hills. And I'm not sure about, how well off Mo was, but you do hear those, it's like Stan Laurel lived in an old apartment in Santa Monica and his name was in the phone book and people would visit him, and Mr. Keaton. And Groucho was not fabulously wealthy, but he was well off. I mean, he had some millions when he died, because he tended to be frugal. Although Erin went a long way to spending a lot of his money on redecorating and things like that.
Yeah.
But he had lost his first fortune in the stock market crash of '29. Once again, a living piece of history. After all those hard scrabble years in vaudeville, taking trains from one train to the next with dingy dressing rooms and audiences that threw things and terrible conditions and all this, they finally became big Broadway stars and bought homes in Great Neck, Long Island, and drove big, long cars. And then, bang, the stock market crashed, and every successful entertainment person had all their money tied up, and they had to start over again. And that really stung Groucho, and he never wanted to go through, and happily never had to. He said the easiest money he ever made was You Bet Your Life. He had to do the least and was paid the most of the film career and all that. That was like his most lucrative period. So he at least got that. But yeah, he would give money to people who needed it. Wasn't grouchy about that.
Good man. I know he had a theater room in the house. You would often occupy it yourself, and he tried to keep up with like the current films at the time that were coming out. I know he was a big All in the Family fan, but do you remember any filmmakers or films that he really loved around that time of coming out?
He liked Mel Brooks. I mean, he saw a lot of the talked about movies. He loved Woody Allen, and he turned on his peers to Woody Allen, because they would be stuck in, comedy today isn't what it used to be. People don't know what funny is, and then and Groucho would say, no, there's this young stand-up, and he's going to be on the so-and-so show, and they would all say, thank you, Groucho, you're right, this guy's brilliant. And he adored Woody Allen's films. So Woody Allen and Mel Brooks stand out. And then he would catch older movies on TV and loved watching his quiz show again. Even would walk away from his own birthday party and say, my quiz show is on, so I'm going to go and bid you good night and go into my bedroom, brush my fangs, and get into my pajamas.
Yeah.
Well, Mathew, this was most enjoyable. Your compatriot, I hope, enjoyed it as well, although he didn't participate quite as much. We have to mark you down on participation, but you can do a book report to bring your grade up.
Hey, I just enjoyed the stories, and I don't believe in cutting in if there's no need to cut in.
Good man.
True. All right. Well,
Steve, this was fantastic. We really appreciate you coming on and telling your stories, man. It was great. We love the book. We're gonna push the book more in the outro and intro. And when the movie gets popping, which the movie, I'm speaking it now, the movie is gonna happen. But we definitely want you to come back and hear all about it.
Okay. In terms of a shameless plug,
yes, sir.
Raised Eyebrows is available on Amazon in Kindle and also audiobook with big surprise, me doing all the voices. If someone would like a signed or personalized copy, they can order it directly from my website, which is www.stevestoliar, STOLIAR.com. Otherwise, farewell.
Thank you very much, man. We'll talk to you soon. Have a good one.
You too.
Thank you. Bye-bye. And ladies and gentlemen, that was the great Steve Stoliar. You know what I mean? That was a lot of fun, dude. You came in, we knew we were going to talk some Groucho, but we talked a whole bunch of really cool stuff, man. I like that dude a lot. I think he's great, for real. Groucho, a big fan, the man, you know, like I said, the first time I ever heard about Steve in the book was on Gilbert Gottfried's amazing Colossal podcast. Rest in peace, Gilbert. And great stories there. And from that point, I heard that interview, I grabbed the book. I'm like, I got to check this book out. I read the book. I loved it. You know what I mean? It's, and like I said, even if you're not a Groucho fan, which, how can you not be a Groucho fan, for real? I mean, come on, dude. But even if you're not a Groucho fan, check out the book. Anybody that's ever been a fan of anybody, which, I mean, come on now. Everybody's been a fan of something or someone in their days. If you've been a fan, you're gonna love, like, you get the Groucho stuff, but I also loved the whole aspect of, like, I'm a super fan of a lot of things, and it's in people. And Steve's journey of, like, just being a fan and then getting into the mix, you know, he wanted to try and help bring animal crackers to his campus, you know, to start getting the wheels going again and getting more love for Groucho and the Marx Brothers. And just kind of how it goes from that step to the next step of, okay, now he's being offered to work, you know, with the man. It's really a cool story, you know what I mean, of just the what's the word I'm looking for? I don't even know. The word is the word, brother. But it's just a cool story of how, you know, persistence, you know what I mean? Persistence. There's a lot of luck that comes in certain things, and it's really a cool story. I mean, it started as a fan. He gets to work with Groucho. He gets to meet all these cool people that he loved in film coming up. And then he even gets his door, like, in the end, his foot in the door in the entertainment business. Groucho writes him a nice letter, you know, to the folks at the film school. He gets accepted in, you know. From there he goes and he starts writing, you know, writing for TV. You know, he got the voiceover stuff. We didn't get too deep into the voiceover stuff, but I do think the film's going to happen. And for a moment, when he brought up, I completely forgot that Rob Zombie was going to direct the Groucho Marx movie at one point, and then it kind of it diminished with Rob Zombie, which I think he would actually do a great job with the book. You know, he's a dude. He's kind of got pigeonholed a little bit into the element of horror, I know that the Groucho book was one of the books that he was going to do. I know that he was going to take a stab at RoboCop, I think, at some point. And that kind of went away. But dude, I still think Rob Zombie would kill it. But the new director, I think, he's a good fit for it too. What you think? I know that you picked up the book when you heard we were going to have Steve on
Oh,
it.
yeah.
You gave it a good read. What was your take on the book?
Well, I gotta say, I mean, I love the book. Right here, I
Yeah.
really loved it because you can get a lot of books throughout the years that are biographies or even autobiographies of people that you are fans of and all of that. But what I find, and one of the reasons why I'm not a big reader of biographies or autobiographies, is biographies usually, I mean, it's someone they do their research, they get all this stuff together. It's like, okay, on this date he did this, on this date he did that. He was a part of this, he was a part of that,
Yeah.
which can definitely be kind of dull. Okay, and then with an autobiography, which is usually a lot better, it's still that it will always be kind of, I guess, unless the person who's writing the autobiography is very open or truthful.
Mhm.
What I find when people write their own stories, I mean, they're truthful, but people can't help but put a let's say a positive spin, or a better look on their life and all that. But what I like about this is you have somebody who's so close to what's actually going on, and he's an observer. He's observing how things are going on. You know, the ups and downs, and like you said, there's an awful lot of gray in truth.
Right.
Okay, and when I'm reading this book, I feel like I'm actually seeing what's going on. I don't feel like anything's being shaded or glossed over, which is very good. For me, I really like that because it gave me a feeling that I was actually part of the inner circle. I felt like I was part of being in there to see what actually was going on, the ins and outs, the good, the bad.
Yeah.
And that's why I really like this book, because it really takes a no holds bar. This is what happened. This is his. It's his story, but it's the story of Groucho and everyone involved in his life in those 3 years, everything that went on, and I really do feel like it's more of an observation piece instead of being written for an agenda, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, just because he's a fan doesn't mean he's biased in it. There's a
Yeah.
great story in the book about how where he gets a radio. Erin actually lets him tells him just take Groucho's radio, and then
Yeah.
Groucho's like, that ain't your radio, brother. You know what I mean? They have a moment, and
Yeah.
then Groucho comes back. I was going to bring that up in the interview when we were talking about how oh, well, people would give Groucho hard times of being like, why are you so like sarcastic and like mean, so to speak? And it's like that's people can't tell the difference between entertainment and reality sometimes. And like it's like when friends ball bust, you know what I mean? Give hard
Yeah.
times to each other. It's like the same deal. And I was gonna say a great little moment of like sweetness, an inside look at the sweetness of like Groucho, Julius, know what I mean? Is that radio incident where Erin gives Steve something that is Groucho's without asking Groucho, and it comes back and bites him in the ass a little bit. But then Groucho's he gets upset about it, but then like he comes back and he's humane about it. He's like, cool. I thought that was a very sweet moment in the book. But yeah, the book's great. Anybody out there that's a fan of Groucho, maybe you just know the name Groucho. It's definitely a good read. It's also like the aspect of the Erin Fleming character is kind of really, it's really dark and twisted. Like I remember that when I heard Rob Zombie was going to direct the film,
that was the element that I was like really rub Zombie like when he said in the interview how Zombie wanted to kind of get into a fan working with this idol type deal.
Yeah.
I can see that, but the part that I thought would be really Rob Zombie like was the whole element with like the wicked, the caretaker, the wicked witchy type element of Erin Fleming and the darkness of it. And like, I've seen situations like that before. It's very sad and tragic where somebody will come into somebody's life. I was like very invested in the book for that reason too, because like I know a personal situation where somebody came into a grandparent's life, in a grandfather's life, we'll say, and with a slightly younger woman, not as young as Erin was in this situation, but kind of like somebody a little slightly younger that manipulated this grandparent into kind of turning his back on his family, which I thought was really dark. So like I had like a weird extra tie-in to it, you know what I mean? So that book hit me on multiple levels. And for anybody out there, Erin's story doesn't end well. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but it's in the book. The Wicked Witch does have the house fall on top of her, you know what I mean? But I mean, even she was a weird victim in her own right, I guess. Like you're not just born that person, you know what I mean? Like her home life, I don't know, dude. Her home life was probably chaotic, you know what I mean? She probably learned that somewhere and it just kind of fell into play in her life. Sometimes you become the things you hate, so to speak. I think there was a little bit of that sprinkled in too.
Well,
But
like on what Steve said, that she had paranoid delusions. I mean, it was obvious that she
schizophrenic.
was a woman with mental issues.
Right.
I have to admit, when I was reading it, I kind of thought it was bipolar. I mean, the
Sure.
constant mood swings, going back and forth. But I mean, even with mental health, I mean, you also have to take responsibilities for your actions. Um, but yeah, I mean, it was an interesting look at that situation, and at not just that situation, Groucho, but kind of an inside look of the older classic actors and talk show hosts and writers of a foregone era that's no longer around. And I mean, you look at our society now, a lot of things are changing. A lot of what we you know grew up watching, the whole structure for film and cinema is changing. And that was kind of like the same thing with a lot of those people who grew up doing vaudeville and all of that, and they kept on going, and things kept on changing. And one of the problems is when you get older, sometimes the change is not very conducive for those who have come before.
Right. Yeah, it's for sure. Like we didn't really get too deep into it, but yeah, documentaries on Elvis, on Shemp, the Marx Brothers, Martin Luther King Jr., which is interesting. Maybe when we get him back, maybe we can talk about that. Wrote for Murder She Wrote, Simon and Simon, um, the new WKRP in Cincinnati.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I could be leaving some stuff out here. He did voice.
Yeah, he also wrote for one of your favorite series, Sliders.
Oh, Sliders. How could Jerry
3
O'Connell in
episodes
the
of
building?
Sliders.
Alex Hawk's favorite actor in Slider, the big dude.
Nice Davey.
He's thin now, but he used to be a big dude. I prefer him in there's a Tales from the Crypt episode with him in there where he's got these like weird shit in his body, like leeches in his body or some weird thing. I don't know, madness. Voiceover work, Frosty Returns, kid.
Yeah, Frosty Returns.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Snoopy
Reunion.
There it is. I didn't want to say returns again.
You
You know what I mean? The
But
Oz
yeah,
Kids. Yeah.
he's done a lot of stuff. And again, I mean, both Ben and I, our fingers are crossed. We're praying to the Lord that we get this on the big screen, because I think that would be a very interesting film to see. Because again, like we said, you look at a lot of different biopics and all that, it's okay, they take a segment of someone's life and they focus on it, which is great, but not many of them are like I said, an observer watching all this happens. And especially, I mean, using Steve as like the audience surrogate, going into this house, living with Groucho Marx for 3 years. And I have to say, I'm totally psyched. I hope, I really hope that everything falls into place, because I'll be the first one to buy a ticket. I want to see
Sure.
that movie.
For sure. Great relationship with Dick Cavett again. If folks out there aren't hip to Dick Cavett, Dick Cavett, definitely get down with it. I honestly think he's better than Johnny Carson. When I go and watch an older interview, it's with the Dick Cavett show. He had on all these cool actors and filmmakers, also musicians, dude. Jimi Hendrix up on this, Salvatore Dali, artist. You know what I mean? Just a really cool dude. I think Dick Cavett got the respect of the artist because he would actually, like, if somebody wrote a book, he would actually read the book. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? To be able to keep up with conversation and not just ask your typical questions. So yeah, I love Dick Cavett all day long. He's the man. But hell yeah, dude, this was another fun episode. I had a lot of fun doing this. I know you did too, my brother. We're gonna put a link in the description where you can go to his website and grab the book. I would definitely go grab the book, get it autographed. If you're gonna buy a book, dude, buy it autographed. You know what I mean? I bought the book. I might buy another book just to have the autograph. You know what I mean? Steve's a great dude. Get out there and support him. And we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you do, go listen or watch wherever you did it, wherever you did it. Feel free to do so. Show the Boombastic Boys a little love. Of course, we got the Patreon. There'll be the big promo picture at the end of the episode at patreon.com/BoomBasticStreaming. Catch all our podcasts uncut early. Get early BoomBastiCAST. All the other shows, you get uncut videos in there. And you also got a whole bunch of our, we got like 20 plus of our films are up there for you to watch. So definitely support everybody that was on this screen in this episode. Nah, I mean, oh yeah, nah, I mean. With that being said, we hope everybody has a good one, and we'll catch y'all on the next episode of the BoomBastiCAST. Peace.